I'm going to talk about our track on shape correspondences with non-isometric deformations. So this study considers the problem of shape correspondence, which basically established the mapping from one surface to the corresponding points on another surface. There are two main types of methods: registration methods, which directly work on the shapes in R3, and spectral techniques, which typically processed in a high-dimensional feature space. Shape correspondence has many applications. For example, given two shapes with known correspondences, we can interpolate or extrapolate between these shapes to get additional shapes. For in terms of shape reconstruction, the single view can be captured using RGB sensors, but due to occlusion, they can't have the entire surfaces captured, and therefore multiple views need to be fused using these correspondences for alignment. Information transfer, once we know the correspondence between source and targets, we can use that to transfer information such as textures from the source to target. And for classification and retrieval, we can use, especially for shapes with non-rigid deformation, we can use these correspondence to factor out the pose differences and then focus on the actual shape. There are many different types of deformations, and we look at them quickly, including articulation, which involve piecewise rigid deformation, bending, which have geodesic distances preserved, including in a non-isometric or near isometric manner. For stretching, that includes isotropic or anisotropic stretching. Basically, the geodesic distances are no longer preserved. And for topological change, you can see that it could create a shortcut or have certain links, geodesic links broken. Now, this often happens when certain parts of the shape touch, and that creates a topological handle. So what we do study here is that we want to collect a set of quadrupeds, because that allows us that's useful for analyzing non-isometric deformation. And you can see that there are all sorts of different challenges here. They contain large non-isometries. So you can see even the same the hind leg. You can see that there are significant changes in terms of shape and the length, and they also have non-corresponding features. For example, the horn appears here but not on other quadrupeds. And we also want to study the problem of the distribution of correspondences. So sometimes correspondences are accurate, but that doesn't mean necessarily mean they are good, because these are two typical problems. One is correspondence actually cluster in local areas with large areas uncovered, or the correspondence can be rather sparse. That means applications that require dense correspondence may not work well. So these can be caused by misalignment during registration, or poor interpolation, or failure to establish a satisfactory correspondence. So there are also some practical challenges to build when building a benchmark dataset. So capturing benchmark dataset can be labor intensive. So real-world objects must be created, and the permissions to scan or distribute models are required. And high-quality scanning and refinement of a single model can take hours, and subsequent labeling requires further manual work. Now, if you look at the existing method papers, they often use the same datasets, but evaluate their methods in different ways. And the learning-based works also often arbitrarily split datasets. So we actually organized a track last year that studies a range of definitions from articulated to near isometric to and non-isometric. At the keynote in the last year's 3-hour workshop, Mirella Benchen commented on our work, then saying the non-isometric definitions are not enough. So, and also in the recent years, there are lots of new methods for handling non-isometry. So, and from the literature, we know that no method is necessarily superior in all scenarios, and how to choose a suitable method for a given dataset given scenario is important. So in this track, it's organized in the following steps. So we first curate a dataset which tries to address a problem of non-isometric deformation, and then we ask specialists to label the dataset. We call for participants and then evaluate the results. So to start with, we need to curate a data set. Now, instead of scanning our own, we actually use existing data to avoid copyright issues. So we use the shapes from the Sketchfab with many shapes that have license that have that permit redistribution, something like Creative Commons, and we also use some shapes from Aim at Shape, which may require additional acknowledgements. At the end, we have a data set of these shapes. They range from partial shapes and shapes of different poses, different animals, and different sizes. And then the next step is to label the corresponding points. We ask three specialists to label the data for correspondences, and the midioid correspondence was actually chosen as ground truth to reduce the human error. And then we put these shapes into multiple test sets. Within each test set, there are a bunch of test cases. Each one involves two shapes, a source and target. And the participants method is asked to produce correspondences from the source shape to the target shape. We use a range of methods I used in the study. So Boyce's poly it's a very typical non-rigid ICP formulation. It uses nearest neighbor to find correspondences. The energy function combines point-to-point and point-to-plane distances data terms with a locally as rigid as possible formulation to regularize deformations. The method Dyke et al. The method uses basically attempts to estimate an anisotropic deformation by iteratively applying non-rigid registration and then updating the estimated anisotropy. The Lee et al. Observed that in common scenarios such as articulate motion of human, deformations are primarily piecewise rigid. In such cases, errors tend to concentrate in small areas, and then they propose the L1 norm-based sparsity regularization. An R3D SHREC uses an initial set of correspondences for pre-alignment, followed by non-rigid ICP using a coarse-to-fine approach. Rodella, which extends the functional mapping formulation to the problem of partial matching. Azos and Benchen, they propose a method to refine an initial functional map. The method can handle non-isometric cases, and unlike early functional mapping approaches, the method can compute subvertex correspondences. And Ren et al. Use a functional approach. Information about surface normals is incorporated into the energy function, which helps the method handle problems associated with intrinsically symmetric shapes. Next method, Vesner et al. They propose a spectral method capable of handling non-isometric deformation. A multi-scale approach is used where correspondences are established in the finer and finer shape segments. And then Marin et al. They formulate a new basis function for functional mapping methods. The basis encodes extrinsic information as well as intrinsic information of traditional Laplacian operators. The new basis is incorporated into a state-of-the-art functional mapping method, which uses 6 hand-placed landmarks for initialization. And finally, Melzi et al. Propose a zoom-out and efficient iterative refinement method, which progressively increases the size of the functional map in an iterative manner. Now, for those methods which rely on some initial correspondences, we use pruning-based approaches to prune initial set of correspondences which are near isometric, and then these are used as the initialization. So this shows how different methods are applied to different subsets, and you can see that most methods are applied to the whole set with some exceptions. In order to evaluate the quality of correspondences, we use one of the well-known methods, which basically means that for a point on the source surface X, we work out the geodesic distance between the ground truth location and the estimated correspondence from Y to G, and then this is then normalized by the area of target surface, so or square root of that. So overall, this shows the overall accuracy of the results. So you can see that despite the assumptions of Boyce's and Pauli, which is better suited to isometric deformations, the method actually clearly performs almost the same as the best method, Ren et al. The explanation for the good performance could be that most shapes have the same orientation and share a similar pose. Now, conversely, Westner et al. Perform unexpectedly poorly, considering that the method is designed to handle non-isometric deformations. So here we look at a subset test set 3. You can see that both Melzi and Marin perform better than all other methods. The accuracy of the results presented here only tell half the story about the performance of these methods. This performance measure does not consider the quality of the correspondences established. So then we propose a new measure, which is based on the coverage measure. So the idea is we create a Voronoi cells over the surface. Then we check what proportion of cells actually contain at least one correspondence. And that we define as coverage. So coverage is a function with the number of cells. So in this case, if we have two cells with two, each of them has at least one correspondence. So that's a 100% coverage. Then we can increase the Voronoi cells to 5. We get a 60%, and to 25, and 50, and 150, and 500. Okay, so we can then that leads us to create a diagram like this. So you can see that. So this is a synthetic case where different types of typical mappings are considered for. So example, these are so you can see that results close to bijective are typically desirable for dense methods. You can see that these have a high coverage, with even with increasing number of Voronoi cells, and sparse, well distributed, and a correspondence typically present as a slow slope. Okay, so these methods are sparse correspondence but are well distributed. And for those methods which have a sharp right angle like this, these are the methods like the orange and the green lines. These are indicate the region on the surface has no correspondence. So we use this to evaluate different methods. So that actually gives another view of comparing different methods, so not only looking at the accuracy, but also looking at the coverage. So these are the coverage diagrams for the methods used on the whole data set. So you can see that the coverage actually is rather interesting results. So while the accuracy of Westerner et al. Was low, the method actually exhibits the closest performance to full and dense correspondence coverage. And the Ren et al. Perform second best. Both methods promote bijectivity and therefore produce both dense and well-distributed correspondences. So there's also a significant performance gap between the other methods. So you can see that these two methods are clearly better than the other methods. So that shows that there are still areas that could be improved. So we look at the test set 4. So this is a test set that involves these pairs. Okay. So all methods except Westerner et al. Performed particularly poorly on this test set. So you can say Westerner et al. Performs pretty good in terms of coverage, but all the other methods are a lot worse. And Poises and Pauli performed the worst. You can see that this curve is really bad. That means this method is unable to properly model the local non-isometric deformations, and therefore registration is not really possible. That leaves large areas are not well aligned. So as we can see, by looking at these, not only looking at the correspondence accuracy, but also the coverage, that gives us a clearer picture of how different methods actually compare and perform and compare with each other. Okay, so as conclusions, we propose a benchmark dataset with sparse ground truth and a new ground truth based on the a set of quadrupeds. Now this allows this dataset involves a large non-isometric deformation, and we also propose a new evaluation measure coverage that helps better understand how different methods perform in terms of shape correspondence. There's scope to include a training facility for deep learning based methods. Obviously, these methods require a large amount of training data. We discovered that we're able to extract meaningful quantitative information about the sparsity and distribution of correspondences for a dataset, in addition to the accuracy of correspondences. And the results presented here demonstrate that this dataset presents a challenging problem for even state-of-the-art methods, and that means that shows that there's a need for further research in this area. Okay, so these are the references for participating methods, and you can find the link for the dataset here. Thank you for listening.